Hello, everyone. My name is Jonathan Fischer from Cascade Rail Foundation. I'll be your host for today's program. Today, Cascade Rail Foundation is going to present the Doug Cummings collection. We're going to learn about Cascade Rail Foundation and what we do, about some of Cascade Rail Foundation's strategic partners, and how these strategic partnerships facilitate CRF's mission to preserve, process, and present collections, as seen in our case study, the Doug Cummings collection. We preserve and present the Western history of the Milwaukee Road, its ancestors, and subsequent short lines. We preserve and present structures and equipment central to the history of the Milwaukee Road, such as the South Clay Elm Depot and Substation, Palouse to Cascades Trail, Milwaukee Road 5057, and our bay window caboose. We cooperate with Washington State Parks for the Palouse to Cascades Trail and the South Clay Elm Rail Yard. We collaborate with a variety of community partners, as you can see here on the screen: CAMA, Mountains to Sound, and Palouse to Cascades Trail Coalition, just to name a few of our friends. Cascade Rail Foundation is also a member of the Pacific Northwest Railroad Archive in Burien, Washington. We have a Western archive of Milwaukee Road photos, ephemera, documents, so on and so forth, that we present, preserve, and store at PNRA. We use this area for research space and for, frankly, collaborating with other railroad heritage organizations like the GN, NP, SPNS, Friends of the Burlington Northern. We use our collections to present the history of the railroad. We do that along the trail with interpretive signage, with live programming, with online presentations such as this, through our YouTube channel, and through our archival websites. We recently renewed our cooperative agreement with Washington State Parks. Here's a picture of our substation and our depot in the foreground. My car is in the background. We restored the depot in South Clay Elm in the early 2000s. It serves as our museum and has a restaurant space available for lease. Mary is seen here inside our museum. She's one of our original volunteers. She's been working on this project since before we existed, which is over 20 years. Hats off to all of the volunteers at Cascade Rail Foundation. We preserve artifacts and have interesting exhibits at the museum. The development of the substation is a long-term goal of Cascade Rail Foundation. Here, Frank Zellerhoff, last living West Coast substation operator, explains the inner workings of the substation, seen on the left during a private tour and on the right during a recording session that we used for one of our presentations. We've worked cooperatively with Washington State Parks for over 20 years. Here's a detailed map from the park's website that kind of shows the extent of the trail. It's pretty amazing what has been preserved, and we're excited to be able to cooperate in the history part of the preservation process. I just had to throw this picture in there just because it's kind of cool. Help us preserve the history of the Milwaukee Road. We've been installing station signs along the right-of-way. Here, Mark Brolesky, board vice president, poses on a cold, wintry day at Roxborough, Washington. Mark just recently completed a substantial project installing station signs along the right-of-way. We've also preserved our caboose in the South Clay Elm Rail Yard and the adjacent caboose structure. This is just to the east of our depot and substation. One of our projects is the restoration of Milwaukee Road 5057, a U25B that operated on this track up until the shutdown of the Milwaukee Road. The 5057 has been at the Pondere Valley, POVA, shop in Usk, Washington for the past 10 years. On May 27th, 2025, 5057 went from POVA in Usk to Newport, Washington. Then on May 28th, the 5057 went from Newport, Washington to the BNSF interchange at Sandpoint, Idaho. On May 29th, 5057 was picked up by BNSF at Sandpoint, Idaho. From there, they transported it to Richland, Washington in our new shop at Columbia Rail. I want to just call out a special thanks to BNSF and all of the nice folks that we talked to there. They were very helpful, and they were very generous and patient with us and generous in their support. So thanks to BNSF. We do a lot of other things. We use the depot to host events. Here at the annual pilgrimage of the John Wayne Pioneer Wagons and Riders Association is having a potluck while Mark Borleski talks about the history of the trail. And here are just a couple quick pictures of the armada that the Pioneer Wagons and Riders have. It's quite an amazing event and really a lot of fun when they truck all the way across the state of Washington from Cedar Falls all the way to the Idaho border. And here they're shoving off with our caboose in the background early in the morning. From here, they go all the way down the Yakima River Canyon, through tunnels, over bridges, the whole thing. It takes them, I don't know, a week or two to get this all done. Cascade Rail Foundation is one of the founding members of the Pacific Northwest Railroad Archive in Burien, Washington. It's a great place to both do research and collaborate with other railroad historians and just kind of hang out and have fun. You never know who's going to be in the house. In this picture, we had three magazine editors, Mark, who was the editor of the Streamliner at the time, my dear friend Rich Wilkins with the SPNS publication, and noted author, famous author, Kurt Armbruster, who's the editor of the NP's Main Streeter magazine. We present the history of the Milwaukee Road using a variety of media. One example of this is Bridge Day, 4 Milwaukee Road Bridges of Significance by Mark Borleski. This was presented live at a PNRA Zoom meeting and now is on the CRF YouTube channel. And I put a reference in here for what I think the best place to find this is. We have a number of interesting videos on our YouTube channel. Another one, for example, by another board member, Wayne Monger, Milwaukee Road's Rocky Mountain and Coast Divisions. This was a really cool program of all kinds of rare stuff. This was November 22nd of last year when Wayne presented it at a PNRA Zoom meeting. Or actually, this would be 23, sorry. It's been a year and a half or so. Some of the other programming we've done is Electrifying Stories from Cedar Falls with Alan Miller and Frank Zellerhoff. That was back in 2023, and we did that in conjunction with several local museums, also partners. Alan came back and did a special presentation, Memories of the Milwaukee Road on the Ole Pen. That was a really interesting project to work on with Alan, who I enjoy collaborating with on all sorts of projects. We had a swiminar in Swim, Washington, coincidentally. And we also had it at the Highland Heritage Museum in Burien, Washington, another one of our partners, on Saturday, May 25th, 2024. You can see that in Swim, we had a just absolutely outstanding audience of several hundred people that were learning about the Milwaukee Road's history on the Olympic Peninsula. Here, we also did a program this year in 2025 on the waterfront with, again, my dear friend, Frank Zellerhoff. Just a great, he's just one of my friends. And we talked about the barge operation on Pier 27 on the Seattle waterfront. And, you know, if you haven't heard the story about how Frank used a flashlight to shine SOS at an office so he could get rescued off a stranded barge, you haven't lived. We also partnered with the Vashon Heritage Museum to present this program as well. Frank has lived on Vashon most of his life, and this was a chance to share his program not only with the railroad community, but also with his family and his friends. And it is fun. Here's Aaron Schwartz, one of our board members, Frank in the middle, and yours truly on the right. Really just absolutely tons of fun and a great creative program. Cascade Rail Foundation's strategic partnership with the Pacific Northwest Railroad Archive made it the donation of the Doug Cummings collection possible. PNRA has the facilities, equipment, volunteers, and staffing to properly preserve, organize, and present collections for researchers and the public. PNRA's location near the SeaTac Airport makes visiting easy. They maintain regular hours and have workspace available for volunteers and visitors. You know, some places you can order a slide online and they'll scan it and send it to you for a fee. And only their paid staff or their authorized researchers are ever allowed to even come near this stuff. PNRA is a lot more inclusive, allowing volunteers to actually look at source material, you know, under supervision and work with things directly. So the Doug Cummings collection was pretty significant, and that took a few years, and we worked very closely with the Cummings family to make sure that, you know, this was really the right fit for them. And Doug's collection is just absolutely enormous, as those of you that knew Doug or know Doug would expect. Yeah, that's not an exaggeration. 150 to 175,000 color slides. You can see the storage, the Logan boxes on the left that were in their storage locker. Of those, there's 800, a little more than 800 color slides in Doug's collection of the Milwaukee Road. So most of this collection is other things. Of that 850 images, there's maybe a dozen or two that weren't taken by Doug. So this is primarily Doug's primary work. None of this has really been seen before. Along with the slide collection, there was 40 boxes of research material, including all of Doug's work, because, you know, for many, many years, he was the editor of the magazine Extra 2200 South. Also in the collection was a large file cabinet of large format black and white images. Here's just an example of one of, I don't know how many thousands of these things he had. All kinds of really cool stuff. Logging stuff, transit stuff in Vancouver for those trolley fans out there, PGE, you know, a lot of Canadian White Pass in Yukon, all kinds of stuff. We needed a U-Haul to transport the collection from West Vancouver, BC to PNRA at Burien. And in the 6 months that PNRA has had the collection, they've completed an inventory of what was received. You know, that's quite a bit of effort. And various groups, for example, the Great Northern Historical Society, has already created a finding aid explaining where all of Doug's many, many images of the Great Northern are, where they are, what they are, how you find this, how you find that, et cetera, et cetera. So researchers have, you know, aren't just randomly looking in boxes on the chance that they might find something of interest. So let's take a look at some of the photography of Doug Cummings. I mean, after all, you know, as much as we love trains, we like looking at pictures of them. So of this just enormous collection of stuff, you know, what stood out to me is on May 20th, 1967, Doug, and I assume Doug must have been with somebody, as we'll see, they chased the train all the way from Kittitas west to Auburn, Washington. So this was quite a day. Here's the first shot, or one of the first shots, I should say. Passing the Kittitas Depot, you can see the engineer on the box cab waving out the window as the substation operator waves back. What a classic shot. You know, thankfully, the Kittitas Depot is being restored. So our hats off to those nice folks, and we wish them all the best in their restoration project. Here's that same train, you know, chugging along westbound. This is, probably I'm going to guess like late morning or something, just coming from the sun angle. It'd have to be because, as the day goes on, we'll see. So we made it to Cle Elum in the midday now for a crew change. And here's a couple pictures of that crew change with our iconic depot in the background. Now, the depot looks a little run down, folks, but remember, it had over 30 more years of deterioration to go before Cascade Rail Foundation started the restoration effort on that project. So let's continue to follow the train west. Well, actually, I guess we're going to look at one more picture here at Cle Elum. And what's interesting here is on the left, you can see the Puget power supply that feeds the building. And that is a very interesting spotting feature for those of us that want to build N-scale substations on our layout. Now the train's heading west, and here we are heading upgrade in the early afternoon over Cabin Creek. Doug was able to catch up with the train to get this just absolutely classic shot at Hyatt with the bungalows and the substation and a guy without a shirt on in the background. So it must have been a lovely day in May. I still see some snow on the ground. So this must be one of the first warm days of spring. Here's that same train. So, we're working our way west, and this is at Cedar Falls. We used this image in the Electrifying Stories from Cedar Falls presentation, and I want to thank my dear friend Dale Sanders for his help with that presentation. That was one of the early ones, and it went well. You can see the substation in the background. Frank Zellerhoff lived in one of the bungalows there, and coincidentally, Alan Miller lived in the same bungalow, but not at the same time. Nor did they really know each other. They just had never crossed paths until we got together for the Cedar Falls presentation. So this is why I think Doug must have been with somebody else, because the idea, I know Doug pretty well, but the idea that he could hang out the car window and drive and take this picture, that's beyond most of us. But look at this, going through Maple Valley, pacing the train, just absolutely beautiful day. I mean, just want to just sit here and imagine what that must have been like. So now Doug's followed the train to Renton, and we're along Hauser Way. And there's a lot of really interesting spotting features here. First, the guy walking across the street with the 6-pack of Rainier beer. So one must assume that it's got to be after 5 now, at least after 5 somewhere. In the subsequent images, we'll see this train rumbling down the street while this guy in the camper on the right tries to bypass the train. It's kind of interesting. At the end of the day, Doug finally got this picture in the late afternoon, early evening, going past the Milwaukee Road Depot in Auburn, Washington. I look at the scene, and this area in Auburn it has industrialized quite a bit since this picture was taken. I want to just, at this time, thank the Cummings family. Gordon and the entire family are just absolutely wonderful people to deal with. We worked through the process and figured out ultimately that Cascade Rail Foundation and PNRA was the right place for Doug's collection to go. And I want to thank my friends that helped make this possible for the Cummings family. Nils Huxtable, who's known Doug, for 60 years. Dale Sanders, my dear friend, who worked with Doug a lot and was very helpful. I mean, I would not have been able to have done this without Dale's help. And on the flip side, once we got the collection to Burien, Rich Wilkins at PNRA has just been an absolute rock star, getting this stuff cataloged, organized, figured out, and digitalizing much of the material. The images that we saw today were scanned by Rich. You can watch today's program in the future on YouTube, and here's kind of a link to our YouTube channel. Cascade Rail Foundation, like I say, maintains its collection of photos, maps, and ephemera at the Pacific Northwest Railroad Archive. in Burien, Washington. My name is Jonathan Fischer. I was your host and moderator for today's program. You can contact me. I have a PNRA address as well as I create programming for them. So long, and thanks for watching, everybody. And there's a QR code here on our poster. You can scan that QR code and become a member of Cascade Rail Foundations with a few clicks of the mouse. So thanks again, everybody, for watching, and I hope that you have a really great day. This is Jonathan Fischer, your host and moderator, saying, stop my share first. Now I'm going to say, bye for now.